Hello, everyone. Welcome to USAID Asia Counter-Trafficking In-Person Summit. From Evidence to Asia to Action, hosted by Winrock International. My name is Abigail, and I will be your technical facilitator today. To ensure that you have a smooth experience with Zoom, I will be going over a few of the settings with you for leveraging technology in the private sector innovations. We will begin in just a moment here, but before we get started, we want to cover a few features available to you. We are using Zoom meetings to enable as much interactivity as possible. Your participation via chat is highly encouraged, and our team will work to acknowledge and address as many comments and questions as we can throughout today's session. To help us acknowledge you and your questions and inputs, please rename yourself to your name and the organization you work for by clicking the participants button at the bottom of your Zoom window, hovering your mouse over your name, clicking more, and then rename. This meeting will be recorded. Please keep your camera off unless you are invited to speak in order to help everyone have a smooth connection today. Continue the conversation in the conference community on MS Teams and spark further conversations on social media using the hashtags WinrockE2A and Evidence to Action Air. Once again, you are in the session titled Leveraging Technology in Private Sector Initiatives, Innovative Solutions, Practices, and Research Methodologies. We are now ready to get started. I'm going to hand the floor to Xin-Yi Chao, Responsible Recruitment Partnership Specialist for USAID Asia CTEC. Xin-Yi, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Abigail, for that. Hi, can everybody hear me well? Right. So good afternoon, no, good morning or good evening, everybody, depending on where you are. And thank you so much for attending this session. So as Abigail has mentioned, my name is Xin-Yi from the USAID Asia Counter-Trafficking in Persons project. And I'll be your moderator for this panel on leveraging technology in private sector initiatives, featuring innovative solutions, practices, and research methodologies. So to keep in mind the research theme of the summit, and for those of you who have watched the opening session on day one, there is this amazing quote by one of our speakers yesterday about how research is like medicine, and we need to sort of target the right medicine to the right disease. So to me, if we were to expand that analogy a little further, this session is really about exploring how technology can be used as tools to sharpen those used to sharpen the diagnosis a little better, or to help with developing a treatment. And we can certainly also discuss if they have the potential to be the very treatment to provide better outcomes for those trapped in traffic situations, or to prevent them to be trafficked in the first place. So I'm very pleased to have here with me today three very exciting speakers: Hannah Tignani from UN University in Macau, Sang-Yin Marshall from Elevate in Hong Kong, and last but not least, Vera Bella Del Costa from Ulula, all the way in Toronto. So I will let the speakers introduce themselves further and the work they are presenting for this panel later. But the common thread among all of them is that they are practitioners working at the intersection of information and communications technology and the counter-trafficking efforts, or efforts to promote worker welfare or monitor worker exploitation, to use more private sector friendly terminologies. But before we dive into that, I just want everyone in the audience to participate in a little poll to gauge your interest in how I should direct the discussion. Although please be assured that from the poll, you will find that all presenters would likely touch on all three aspects that we are polling you guys on, and noting that some of these aspects are actually interlinked. So with that, Abigail, would you mind just putting up the link for the Mentimeter poll for everybody, and to just, if that's already in the chat, if you can just put it on the screen so that people can see how to enter. I think you just need to put in www.menti.com, and there's a quote. Right, here we go. And yeah, we're just waiting for, and I would just like to use this time to remind the audience that if you have any questions for the panelists in between on what was discussed, please do type into the chat box, and I'll try my best to get the panelists to address them as well. We'll just give this maybe 30 seconds. Again, I would encourage all participants to put in mentimedia.com and use the code 4655915. And just, if it's on your device, you would see an option for you to choose. Or if it's on your website. Now we have the responses streaming in, great. I can see the interest is pretty much, it's a good sign that there's a lot of interest in all of them, which means we would have lots to talk about. Just give it another 30 seconds. And I'll see if it's, this is a happy problem. Well, I can see that the interest is pretty, okay. Again, for people who are just entering the room, we have a poll here that you can access on your device or on the internet, on a web browser, where www.menti.com, and use the code 4655915 to just gauge your interest on what would you like the presenter to go more into, bearing in mind that they would speak on all the aspects. Right, I think looks like we do have a winner for now. So it seems like most of the audience would like the panelists to really talk more about increasing two-way engagement with vulnerable users. And I would imagine that's really about how do we get workers on the ground to use that, and going a little into sort of worker centricity and making sure that whatever apps or whatever tools that we are providing is actually being used effectively by vulnerable populations. So with that, let's Sung-In, would you like to start the presentation talking a little bit about Elevate, and maybe going a little into SafeStep, and also some of the work that you have actually been doing to, I guess this whole idea of design thinking and leveraging, innovation, which is a concept that's more familiar in the private sector world, and what are your experiences sort of, transposing that into the CTIP world, and really getting workers at the center of this, the very center of using the technology.
Sure. Thank you very much, Sinyi, for the introduction. Good morning from Hong Kong, everyone. My name is Sung-In Marshall. I'm the Associate Director for Worker Engagement here at Elevate. Elevate, in brief, is a leading business risk and sustainability solutions provider. And in our worker engagement team, our aim, our vision is to help companies explore the full capacity and capability of worker voice technology through a number of products and services, including our proprietary labor-linked survey technology, a worker app, which includes two-way communication between factory management and workers, several grievance mechanism channels that we implement with partners in Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Mexico. And in addition to all of these worker engagement technologies and solutions, we also have 10+ years of industry knowledge and experience through our audit and assessment work globally. I'd like to thank Winrock for the invitation to participate in this panel today, because as well as the initiatives that I've just mentioned, we're partnering with Winrock International and Diginex Solutions on a technology-driven intervention to reduce the risk of forced labor in migration, specifically along the Bangladesh GCC or Gulf corridor through an app called Safe Step. And that app is part of a larger intervention funded by the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery, focusing on reducing forced labor among migrant workers in Bangladesh, but also looking at informal garment manufacturing in India, as well as the apparel sector in Bangladesh. So I would say that, in addition to the Safe Step app, which is providing a digital tool for migration and providing migrant workers with access to accurate, timely information with connectivity with other migrant workers to share and learn together and to participate in an e-learning module, our other solutions are very much designed to capture worker voice in a way that is effective, rapid, and provides insights to the businesses and clients that we work with. It's been a journey, I think, in developing many of those solutions. And in that journey to learn how to best capture worker voice using technology, we've witnessed certainly firsthand the power and opportunity that technology presents, and certainly the ability of technological solutions to give access to unprecedented numbers of workers to raise issues and raise their voices, and for businesses, stakeholders, and others to hear that worker voice in a way that has not necessarily been possible before.
Sung-in, thanks for that. I just wondering if, you mentioned the Safe Step program, where the Safe Step sort of a project where the idea is really to get workers to sort of interact with the e-learning modules and to use that to make sure that they know that they know what they are in for when they migrate overseas. Can you just walk us through, and I'm speaking from an experience of somebody who wouldn't actually call myself a digital native, needing some help with figuring out how to use an app. And I would imagine for a lot of the vulnerable workers on the ground who may not have access to devices in the first place or may not be familiar with using them, getting them to actually use it and interact with them is one of the challenges. And what are some of the work that Elevate and the team is actually doing on the ground to make sure workers on the ground actually knows how to use that and can interact with that effectively? If you could just go a little bit more into that. And I also invite the panelists to weigh in on that as well.
Great. I'll provide an example for how that we're doing that with Safe, but also how we've kind of achieved adoption of some of the LaborLink survey tools and worker app solutions in our other portfolio of services. But certainly with migrant workers being a vulnerable population, literacy rates maybe not as high as perhaps in other sectors, that adoption of a digital tool can be a challenge, as you've mentioned. We are overcoming that challenge in a number of ways. First of all, the app itself includes very little text. So the app is designed, the way the user interface is designed, is designed to be very visual. The e-learning modules are animated and are designed to interact with the user in a way that's very visually appealing and engaging, and doesn't necessarily require a high degree of literacy or high degree of understanding of how an app works as a digital tool. So in that sense, yes, it is a digital solution, but we're trying to make it as user-friendly, accessible, and interactive in order to encourage use and adoption of the app. We're also partnering with Winrock to conduct on-the-ground stakeholder engagement and training. So we are rolling out the beta version of this app with specific community groups and getting their feedback on, what is their experience using the app and how can we improve some of the functions and features, make it easier to use, understanding that this is a very specific community. It does include vulnerable individuals, and how do we accommodate for that?
Thanks for that.
I would also experience with other solutions, including LaborLink, our worker voice survey, and also with our grievance helplines. We continue to conduct on-site, on-the-ground training and onboarding when we roll out any of these solutions. And so despite our solutions being focused on digital tools, we have found that the digital tool itself is not a panacea, right? It's not the kind of single solution. You still need human interaction and human intelligence to make it effective, right? So in that sense, a digital tool is one element in a wider toolkit that still is very much connected and centered around worker engagement in a more kind of physical, face-to-face.
Right, thanks for that. So I guess what I'm picking up from your conversation is that there is, besides the digital component, what is as important to make sure the tool is important is getting feedback from the users themselves on how they would use it, and then adapting the technology accordingly to the literacy level or the savviness, in terms of interacting with tools on using a tool, which I feel is a great segue to sort of talk about the work that Hannah is doing with Apprise and how, the tool is really about adaptation. And if you could go a little bit into how you actually have also sort of used the tool Apprise to adapt it to different contexts and different exploitation contexts, and how you have used that and working with NGO practitioners on the ground to uncover certain exploitation trends.
Cool. Thanks for the intro. So my name is Hannah Tanyani. I'm a principal researcher at the United Nations University Institute in Macau. And together with our team, we work with the Mekong Club, an NGO out of Hong Kong. And we've developed a system called Apprise. So we started our work in 2016 when we really saw how few people are identified in situations of forced labor and human trafficking. What this told us was there's problems with the current method of identifying victims. So we started working, really doing like what I would call from a research perspective, a needs assessment. We went to Thailand and we met with a number of different stakeholders, so NGOs, labor inspectors, police officers, as well as survivors themselves, to understand what went wrong or what needs help in victim identification. And they really talked about this initial screening phase that happens in the field. As Sungin has talked about with communication barriers, everyone speaks different languages, so they can't talk. And then there are other problems with, say, privacy. If I'm trying to ask if you need help and maybe your boss is right next to you, you're probably not going to feel like you can answer honestly. A lack of training on what are the current indicators of exploitation. We know exploitation changes over time and over sectors. So if I'm a police officer, for example, and I'm told it's only forced labor and human trafficking if the person has bruises, and now I don't look for anything apart from bruises, well, I'm going to miss quite a few cases out there. And the other thing people talked about was a lack of trust, because even in the best cases where you have an interpreter who speaks the right languages, often the interpreters can be bribed and not really interpret your words honestly. So these are the 4 problems that the different stakeholders in the field told us. And from this, we developed our system Apprise, where we have lists of questions which really represent the current sector-specific practices of exploitation. And we have these translated into the main languages of workers in that sector. So if I think of fishing in Thailand, we see lots of people from Myanmar, so Burmese and Mon, and sometimes Shan people as well. And then you have Cambodian and we have Lao people. And there aren't very many other migrant populations in this specific field. If we think of sex workers instead, you see such a huge variety, and maybe like migration flows that come in. So always you see Russian and Uzbek, but sometimes you get a flow of Kiswahili speakers, or French and Portuguese and Spanish speakers. And then the people on the ground, they don't have any of these language abilities. So we developed a system that has these questions. We have them recorded into these languages that I just mentioned, and they're aligned to the ILO indicators of exploitation. So we do a vulnerability calculation. And this is to support on-site investigations in the field between, say, whoever our frontline responder is. So if it's an auditor in a factory, if it's an NGO worker doing their outreach activities, and if it's a police officer doing their inspections as well. So these guys, when they have someone in front of them, they want to talk to them and they can't speak the same language. So at the end of the process, there's a vulnerability calculation, and it says these are the vulnerabilities that have been identified, say withholding wages, document retention, whatever it is, and it supports the frontline responder to understand what to do next. So were you going to say that?
Oh, no, no, just that it seems like this is a very ongoing dynamic process. And so I'm just wondering, what are some of your insights, dealing with the different stakeholders and in uncovering this process? And are there any patterns or challenges in getting it? And do you think you have have you sort of come to a sweet spot in coming up with a protocol or procedure to capture these insights?
So one of the cool things that we see is all of the responses of the interviews are stored onto the phone, and then they're uploaded onto a server afterwards for that organization to analyze their own interviews. But what we have found with that is you can see patterns of exploitation changing over time. And if we think of exploitation as like a game of cat and mouse, like if the cat is the exploiter, they find some loophole, they start doing that until the mouse, the inspectorate, or whoever they are, catch up. And then they're like, oh, now I have to find a different way. And so we have all of these practices that the inspectorate find over time. But we're trying to shorten that time between the cat and the mouse to help the mouse catch up a bit.
Right.
I like the example you talked about from the panel yesterday or earlier, where they were talking about the best medicine and using tools to identify what the problem is and find the best medicine. And we've really seen that ourselves with the prize. We refer to it as Sentinel Surveillance. If we think of disease tracking, we all are very familiar, unfortunately, with diseases right now. But you can have passive tracking where you kind of sit and wait for people to come to you. We can have active techniques. So we take a sentinel surveillance approach where we say you have sentinel sites. And our idea is that we want to uncover trends and patterns of exploitation over time and see how they change. Because if we can identify the pattern, then we can know what we can do next. So how can we prevent it? How can we protect people? The 3 Ps or 4 Ps that we always talk about.
Sure. Thanks for that, Hannah. I actually, now that you spoke about this whole idea of being a sentinel in this very sort of tailored, targeted setting, I sort of want to now pivot also to Vera, who would also talk about her way of using Ulula to landscape, to do this on a much larger scale. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and how that actually might be similar or different from an approach that Hannah has mentioned. And also just to sort of let everybody know, I think after we spoke about, after Vera goes through with the presentation, I would also like to then discuss the issue of addressing any of these grievances that has been uncovered through your tools. But over to you, Vera, for now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks again for having us join. Just a quick introduction, and my name is Vera Belazilkowska. I'm the Director of Programs at Ulula. And Ulula is a social innovation entity looking to always use technology and analytics to advance worker engagement and help organizations monitor and mitigate human rights impacts in their global supply chains. We always approach issues through the lens of accessibility, inclusivity, anonymity, and have a variety of tools using a mixture of surveys and grievance mechanisms and awareness raising modules to help organizations with better data and really go beyond compliance and towards impact. And the platform is multilingual, and it also centralizes all of the engagements from across multiple channels. So we have our OWL app, we have chat apps, integrations like WhatsApp, as well as offline channels, which are really important for stakeholders that are still excluded from accessible and affordable access to the internet. And we have worked in over 30 countries now, a variety of sectors from agriculture to mining, with corporations, nonprofits like Oxfam, but also with industry associations and certification standards like the RSPO. So we kind of span across different types of projects, and we do supply chain work. So we are oftentimes working with corporate partners to establish grievance systems. And we use technology to capture worker voice with frequency and enabling scale. But of course, on the side, we're always thinking about how else can we push the boundary to go beyond the supply chain risk assessment. So really, it has been an activity of thinking about how we can go really begin to map risks at a landscape level and go beyond tier 1. We don't often get to go to places where we know some of the biggest vulnerabilities are. We get asked to go to places where already there's quite a lot of progress. Of course, not as much as we would like to see, but there's quite a lot of challenges that are not yet mapped, not yet assessed, much further upstream into the supply chain. So we are definitely thinking a lot about approaches to get to stakeholders and rights holders and collect information and use that information for risk mapping and heat mapping to drive attention to particular hotspots between our partners as well as other entities that we're working with. And this, when we talk about rights holders, for us, it's not just workers, but it could also be smallholders. It could be other farmers. It could be artisanal miners. We have some projects in the mining sector as well. So it's really about thinking beyond the direct mapped supply chain and really trying to get to where could be the biggest human trafficking and labor rights risks in further upstream into the supply chain, where perhaps many companies haven't even mapped where their sourcing comes from. So I'll give just 2 examples of this work. We've successfully been doing this in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in a mining context. I know it doesn't tend to be a context we get to speak to a lot in Asia and Southeast Asia, but it is a really interesting use case. We're collaborating with over 20 NGOs and kind of trained and untrained incident reporters are reporting issues that they're seeing in the mining sector. We're mapping these incidents, categorizing them, and then making them available in a public map for multiple stakeholders, including governments, companies, to be able to use this information to advance decision-making and hopefully really advance outcomes for people. We're also working on a project with Polaris, who are running the human trafficking hotline in the United States. A project with them in Mexico is working to really try to assess what are the risk impacts of different types of recruitment practices, as well as different labor engagements. So we are collecting difficult to capture insight from workers who are going both from their state of origin, but also through the journey and getting to the state of destination for work. For now, the study is looking just at internal migrants, but we are going to be looking to expand that to H2 visa holders for the United States as well, beginning to triangulate a little bit more information from different sources as well. So I think it's really a challenging topic. It's something that's very interesting and relevant for us to keep working on, because it's often the one that is that's most difficult to begin, given that there's no necessary entry point to a particular supply chain. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Vera. This is really interesting that the work they're doing and that your technology has the ability to reach the hidden populations that even companies with the best of intentions may not necessarily be able to reach, and to try to just, I guess, really begin to map the risk there is on that front. But so actually on that point, I want to sort of draw us back to the chat from with a question from Leanne from Diginex. So thank you so much for the question, Leanne. She mentioned the question is actually meant for Hannah about and it's about ensuring how workers are able to trust that if they do report that they're in a situation of forced labor or exploitation, that they will receive adequate victim assistance. In other words, what will be the remediation protocol for that if cases are detected? So Hannah, please answer that. And actually, I would also like to sort of, after Hannah's, if you could address the question, I'm sure Elevate and Lula would also have their own remediation protocol. Or what do you do with when exploitation is detected? But over to you, Hannah.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Leanne. So the easy answer is we don't have any protocols ourselves for what should happen. But we have ideas. So this is, our tool is supposed to just be like a step for the frontline responders who already do assistance to victims in the field. And then the idea is that they should do follow up using their standard operating procedures. Now, we've done a few pilots in different countries and with different stakeholders, and I'm not going to mention which one I'm referring to, but one of the problems I saw is that while cases are identified, nothing is done about it afterwards. You know, it's like, oh, these guys are all seen as vulnerable, but we don't see a follow through afterwards. We have had all of these ideas of what we were going to track. We were going to maybe look at how many cases were opened, how many extra people were referred to shelters. You know, these kind of things we should see as outcomes if you're now screening more people and finding more cases. So while I may not be a blockchain fan myself, I really see this as an interesting role for blockchain, because surely you could have some kind of a private chain, so not for everybody to see, but for some kind of oversight to say that here are the cases that I have identified and the system has said show some vulnerability. And then this oversight would be that other people could have could also see this chain and say, okay, these are the indicators of exploitation that were raised in this. And so they could hold the frontline responders to account for what happens next. Because I feel this is a big problem, that we have this, I don't know, a weak link in the chain, that people may have all the technology out there to help identify cases, but then they're not doing anything. And they have all of this power, right? If we think of auditors in supply chains, they are the ones who choose who gets interviewed, and they are the ones who choose what happens next. If we think of labor inspectors, it's the same thing. They are the ones who choose who to interview at the docks, for example. And they are the ones who choose whether this case should be followed up. But so I really think, for me, a big role for technology is in increasing transparency.
So I'm hearing two threads here, Hannah. So first, you're telling me that you have this tool that can detect vulnerability, detect potential exploitation. But what is stopping anyone from acting on those information is what I'm hearing is lack of political will or lack of action on the parts of the inspectors, or like it's just they have no resources whatsoever. And what do you suggest?
No incentive, maybe, because
exactly.
we talk to different people, and they again, they would say, you know, it makes us look bad if we find more cases of exploitation. We are hoping that there's like a shift in their mindset, and they go, actually, it makes it look like we're doing our job, because everyone knows there's exploitation within industries and within sectors, and our job is to find it. It's not a negative thing to find cases of exploitation.
I think that's their attitude. That it's not interesting. And what you're suggesting in sort of response to that kind of attitude is trace it down to every single case and sort of just put it in their face using blockchain as an enabler to ensure that form of transparency, and get them to just see it in their faces that this is what's happening. You can't run away from it. You can't say that it's normal, because it's not normal, and it's not decent for people to be exploited in whatever way they are being exploited.
But say, as an academic, I would say there's this researcher called Toyama, and he talks about amplification theory of technology. And he says technology simply is a tool, and it will amplify human intent and capacity. So in simple words, it means if I was going to try and exploit you and cover it up, I'm going to use any means necessary to do it. If I can do it by using technology and fake interviews and fake whatever, then I'm going to. We have to be able to identify the people so that there can be something non-tech related that follows up and pushes them to change. Otherwise, it's just going to keep on going and be undercover in another way.
That's an interesting thought, and I wonder if our speakers, Sung-in or Vera, has any thoughts to Hannah's point on that, and whether you through your own experiences with worker voice and grievance mechanisms, whether you think there's another way to in a way, I guess, incentivize motivation to deal with this exploitation that's been uncovered.
If you don't mind, I have a couple kind of linked to what Hannah raised. I mean, the first thought is I think we could have a whole sub panel on the, potential use case of blockchain in creating that chain of communication. I think that'd be really interesting to explore, maybe in a different conversation. But regarding kind of remediation and grievance and how that's done, and kind of the link back to political will or ability or interest, some of the issues uncovered through worker voice tools or other capabilities, I'd like to maybe say a couple of things. One goes back to the point I was making earlier about digital tools being a way to uncover this huge volume of data, intelligence, information, but also kind of raises the bar in terms of the need to act on that information that's being received, right? Okay, so to Hannah's point, we uncover more cases, more vulnerable people, but what do we do about it? With Elevate, our experience in managing grievance channels in Bangladesh with our partners in the Amader Kota helpline, we have, received a high volume of calls on a regular basis over the years we've been implementing this helpline for the garment sector. And our ability to remediate or address those grievances still really runs on people power. So going back to my point about digital tools being one tool in the toolbox, but still really relying on the need for human engagement and interaction, particularly when it comes to building trust that a tool will work. I think still comes down to reliable partners that are on the ground, to kind of human engagement or interaction. And in the case of Amader Kota, I would say that we partner with Fulki, a local NGO based in Bangladesh, to receive grievances, address them, and make sure that happens in a timely manner. Similarly, with our helpline in Malaysia, the Suara Kami helpline for palm oil, again, we work with a trusted NGO partner, the North-South Initiative, NSI, to be able to address and remediate the grievances. So I think perhaps that underscores the importance of the work that on-the-ground partners can do and do. So for those NGO practitioners in the audience, we see you and very much value the work and partnership, because I think digital tools haven't matured to a point yet where they're able to kind of provide that response in the same way that trusted local partners can. Maybe one day with blockchain, right, Hannah? But at the moment, I don't think we're at that level of maturity yet with the digital tools.
Right, thanks for that. And actually, I think this is a great juncture for me to say that as part of the summit, we do want to encourage cross-sectoral participation and the kind of partnerships that Sangin has just mentioned, where you get a digital partner or a company like yourself partnering with local CSOs on the ground to come up with some kind of mechanism to monitor exploitation, and maybe even get a research activity out of that. This kind of cross-sectoral sort of partnerships is what we are hoping that can spark to the summit. And it's a shout out to all the NGO practitioners out there that feel free to approach any of these practitioners if you think that some of the tools that they're doing can help you in your work to better diagnose what are some of the problems that the NGOs on the ground are seeing. So yes, on that, I would just also like to sort of have let Vera have the opportunity to respond to the question as well. And in your case, it's a case of you're aggregating data on such a broad level, and what do you do with the data, and how do you act on it if there's a chance to do that?
Yeah, well, we do really look at a bit of a bird's eye view, but also quite granular data as well. The grievance mechanisms that we often set up very much are looking to capture and address workers' very specific issues. Of course, there's some data aggregation to do there to be able to spot trends and figure out if something is a systemic problem or if it's a one-off. So there's quite a lot of flexibility there to work with more granular data as well. But I really want to mirror the points made by the other panelists that like building trust is key, working with existing partners as well. But then also to add that really kind of if we are thinking about an accountability structure, we really have to consider what is the role of employers, what is the role of local management in the process, and not necessarily sidestepping or bypassing their responsibility, but actually really getting them as an active member of this process. So it's much more difficult to do, but it's a learning process for everybody, including local employers, recruitment agencies, and NGOs and service providers, like including technical teams like ourselves. We really stand to gain a lot by directly empowering them with these digital tools themselves. Of course, that creates the bigger question of who does what is the role and responsibility of every actor. And we've been really trying to innovate around decentralized systems so that grievance mechanisms are adopted by the employer with oversight from multiple actors like a buyer, a certification standard. And then the employer is also supported by a local trusted CSO or NGO or consultancy group. So to really create as much transparency as we can, as well as accountability in the process, and not really kind of overstepping the responsibility that employers have in really extending these HR services to their workers. So yeah, that's just one additional point.
Right. Vera, actually, thank you so much for raising that point. And that's actually something I want to dig a little bit closer on, because, given your role, and if I'm understanding correctly, you're the service provider to many of these big brands, employers who driven by reputational pressure, they wanted to monitor that, and then they may not know what they sign up for when they do that. And what is your experience sort of dealing with them and trying to drive home the accountability message while at the same time providing them that service? Like, I'm assuming there will be a lot of push and pull, and it will be really great if you can sort of go, this goes beyond the technology, obviously, but it is also very much part of technology, because you guys are the technology experts and you have the data in front of you. I'm just wondering, how have you exercised your leverage, your expertise in getting the employees to do the right thing in this case?
Yeah, I think I'll mirror what Hannah said here. We, in their eyes, like, we're just a technology provider. We don't have the leverage to nudge them in the direction that we would maybe personally want to. This is where collaborations are super important. So, and also working with the right partners. We have also spoken to companies that have wanted whistleblowing systems, but then they don't have the protocols, practices, and even codes of conduct in place to implement and manage something of that scale. Because it's not just a matter of opening that channel of communication, because once it's opened, you have to act. So this is where we will bring in our expert partners from different organizations to work with the companies to first help them build those building blocks, and then the technology plugs in, and that it's a conduit to some of the work, but it's not the silver bullet. So so in various projects and configurations, we definitely are not the ones that have the lever of power. We're the enabler using technology, but we do want to get into projects where there is a lever of power so that change can be made. And we're not collecting data just for the sake of collecting data. That is not what we're about. So yeah, but it's a great question.
Right. Sangin, would you want to respond to that as well? And, given your own work, also working with private sector?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to comment that I couldn't agree with Vera more really on that, is that, collecting data for the sake of collecting data isn't useful for anyone, right? And similarly with grievance mechanisms, it's only effective insofar as it's trusted, used, and followed up on, right? So I think probably the shared or collective challenge really is, how do we make this, unprecedented access to data, information, to issues that workers are raising through various worker voice channels, through grievance mechanisms, how do we make that a call to action for businesses, for, international organizations, for NGOs to kind of coalesce around and really make, I guess, a collaborative effort to address what's being uncovered, right? That's just
right, sure.
Comment, I think.
And just to build off on that, I mean, there is another question coming in from Sophie. Thanks to everybody, which is, I think she cited the example of Hong Kong when the watch list, when I think the US TIP report actually upgraded Hong Kong to a tier 2, upgraded or downgraded the watch list, of the TIP report. And that actually incentivized the government to act on data that was being aggregated from Equal Justice Center and in other data gathering initiatives. So she asked to what extent do you think multilateral organizations and or MNCs can leverage collective influence to encourage governments to improve policy or regulations that perpetuate a lack of accountability? And if I may add to that, I believe there are a couple of such initiatives already, and how successful do you think they have been as being an enabler of these tools to gather data? Would anybody want to start with that? Maybe Hannah, since you're working in academia and working with the private sector, as I understand the Mekong Club is a partner on
Yep.
it.
So I'll respond to part of it, and then I'll try and get to the rest. So with us, we work with multinational corporations, especially with the price audit. And in that, when we've been talking to different brands, they've said, you know, what helps them or what would help them is some kind of collective leverage. Because if they represent, say, 10% or 20% of a factory's orders, they don't have much leverage to insist on change. But if they can understand who else is working with that same factory, and then they can represent maybe 90% of its orders, well, then they have more leverage to insist on change. So in the same way, I guess we could extend to governments as well, although I haven't ever gone the government route with this kind of work myself.
Right. Any thoughts from Vera on collective leverage, whether it is through government channels or through brands?
Mm-hmm. I mean, we're seeing a big shift in movement, and probably in the near future legislation on human rights, mandatory human rights due diligence, especially in the European Union, to follow suit some other countries that have adopted this. So clearly, industry associations, multilateral organizations, brands themselves will play a role, either a positive or a negative role in the enactment of legislation. But we definitely see at least the role of more information, better data about why this is so needed to even out the playing field as something really important. So everybody plays a role in this, and I think companies, it's in their best interest to even out that playing field of what's expected to ensure compliance to legislation, as well as ensure just overall compliance to social standards and international certifications. So yeah, I think there's a lot of advocacy to be done in the positive and negative direction. So we're just hoping that it goes in the positive one,
right.
And we're seeing change.
And I guess that I just also want to add, sort of look back to Hannah's point on, again, data and how what we can do is sort of, if, like collective influence through brands and them sort of mapping out the other suppliers in the supply chain, right? Suppliers who are not acting the right way. But I guess for that kind of transparency to take place, there must be, I mean, most companies, if I'm not wrong, are afraid to share supplier data because of competitive reasons. Is that something that you're seeing? And that is part of the, I mean, on one hand, brands do say that they want to see who the suppliers are, and then if you can act collectively. But would you say that competitive reasons is another sort of obstacle for that kind of collective leverage to happen, and for the kind of data collection on that scale to happen because of that? Would you say that is?
Yeah. Although I have an anecdotal story from having met somebody from Unilever who once told me that he never would have in a million years thought that he would talk to any of the competing entities. And now they all sit on the same boards and they all collaborate in the same initiatives and different industry associations for sustainability or for human rights. So in the last 10 years, I think there has been a big shift between companies to say, hey, how can we pool our resources together to establish something that's effective that all of us can share in, rather than actually being so secretive about our supply chains and therefore not getting anywhere because maybe one of us alone doesn't have enough leverage in that particular supply chain. So I think things are shifting drastically, and we've seen that working with some industry associations in the last few years.
Interesting. Now, on that point, I'm not sure if this is a good question to talk to everybody about, like, as much as companies are now, as you've mentioned, more willing to share data, and all of you are in the space of providing, information and gathering information, and all of you have some sort of information. What are your thoughts on sharing information with other providers? Like, do you think, as information providers in this space, can you ever collaborate with another provider to sort of create this giant meta pool of data? Just throwing it out there. I
can go. I'll say sure, but there has to be a purpose for this. And if we're thinking just logistically, we all have our own formats for what we collect, and we have our own reasons for collecting information. So figuring out a way of standardizing, of making all of this big data make sense together, it's going to be a little bit of a nightmare. But yeah, if there's a purpose where we can agree that we might want to share the data, then of course.
Would Sang-in want to just to get your thoughts on that as well?
Thoughts kind of based on the question, but also kind of going back to what Vera was commenting on around kind of collaboration across competing brands or companies. And I think I'll maybe conclude by saying a couple of things. One is that a collaborative solution, so whether that's data sharing across businesses or data sharing across service providers, like Hannah said, if there's a particular goal or defined objective, I think it has incredible power and potential. And I think that this should be an open invitation to make everyone part of the solution, right? Because no one solution that we've talked about today is going to solve the intractable challenge of forced labor and human trafficking. There's no one silver bullet, right? If there was, we might have found it already. So collaboration, I think, is a key ingredient to moving forward. Second, I would say that, as mentioned before, technology is just one tool in the toolbox. It's maturing and can't be used in isolation. It needs to be coupled with human intelligence, on the ground insight. And I think that if we can work together and maybe share data where it's useful, then there's going to be disproportionately fast changes, and perhaps we can expect to see more change, utilizing the power of technology in the next 5 years than we have in the past 30, for example, if used right? If data is used right, if technology is used right, and if it's used in combination with a collaborative approach and maybe forward thinking, then I think that there could be real movement in the coming years.
Vera, would you want to share your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, no, I agree with the other panelists as well. I think with of course, data formatting it's a real challenge. I think people underestimate that. As Hannah said, we all collect data in different formats for different purposes, measuring different indicators. So there would need to be some kind of a process whereby we standardize and try to compare apples to apples whenever possible, to be able to share some trends and insights. But I definitely see value in doing that and linking up and connecting information and really that transparency in collaboration and in progress is really important. So I mirror that sentiment.
Right. So I've been told that, yes, we are almost, there's a 5-minute warning that there will be a slide up to send participants to the next session. So I will try to wrap up, and I guess what is the resounding message here is, while we're a panel of technology practitioners, I guess the common thread is that actually technology is not a silver bullet to all the problems that we're seeing on the ground when it comes to worker exploitation and human trafficking. It really is about how you use the data, how you use the tools to collect the data, what you make of the data, and how you work with NGO practitioners on the ground to make sure that the trust is there for them to act on the data and to address the problem. And also, just to sum up, and I guess we have also spoken about how sometimes, even when the data is there might not be enough incentives or there's no accountability mechanism or structure to make sure that people act on the data. And that's really when the power of collective leverage, whether it's through legislation or sharing data across different, I guess, formats, and maybe even having a collaboration among the different data providers could is something that this field could potentially sort of think through in terms of thinking about next steps on really solving the issues on the ground. So I think I would stop here for any last closing thoughts. Let me just see. Right, we have this one comment from Daniel that says that technology-driven data collection can be the solution to the defined problem, but so often it is used the other way around. So very well said. And I guess what we have shown here is that we are all trying very hard to use technology as a way to solve the problem and not the other way around. So any closing thoughts from the panelists?
I'd like to say that While we may all be hopeful about the potential of technology for supporting workers in these vulnerable situations, we have to always also be critical that there are good actors and bad actors out there. So the same technology that we might want to use to help people can also be used to exploit them. So always keeping this in mind of who actually is using the technology and for what purposes.
That is a great point, and that actually would be a panel on its own, right? On how we can use that and how do we prevent exploitation of the technology and get, you have users, you have hackers, duping people into doing things, using the very same things that we know in unethical recruitment, and using the same tools to sort of trap them in the cycle of exploitations. Great point.
Yeah.
Sangin or Vera, we have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, I'll do one short takeaway. I think also, as Hannah says, we should always remember that, yeah, of course, the dark web is actually where a lot of these transactions of humans happen, and like this is empowered by technology. So if we're going to be the good spirits for technology, we have to be careful in how we use it, and also to make sure that we're designing it through a human-centered perspective, and making sure we're validating with our rights holders constantly, continuously, and then not underestimating them. They're as savvy as anybody. A migrant worker who's immigrated from Myanmar to the Middle East probably is more savvy than most of us to survive in difficult, challenging environments. So definitely keeping in mind that aspect, that designing with people in mind is key to making our good technology success, so we could hopefully beat the bad technology.
Right. Thanks for that. That's great. And Sangin, any last thoughts?
Just to echo, if we're uncovering, more worker voice, more risk insights, doing more remediation, providing more solutions, how do we bring that together, in a collaborative way and make sure that it is used for good? So just to echo what the other panelists have said.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for attending this session. And I will now, please continue the conversations further on Teams, and please feel free to, on behalf of them, if you have any questions about their technologies and the way they use it, please feel free to ping them on Microsoft Teams, and we hope to keep these conversations going. Thank you. So I'll hand it over to you now, Abigail.
Thank you so much to our panelists and to our moderator today. Our next session will be beginning immediately. Thank you for attending the Evidence to Action Summit. Please join us at other sessions in the summit. You can find links to the next session in the calendar invite, in the chat here, and in your participants guide. The next session will be Trafficking in Persons, Prosecution, Data Questions, and Research, taking place right now. Please transition to the next section, if you would, using the link in the participants guide or the chat here. Please continue the conversation in the conference community on MS Teams, especially if you are interested in finding collaborators in the pitch competition being offered through participation in the Evidence to Action Summit. Thank you again for your participation. Thank you to our moderator, and thank you to all of our panelists. We look forward to seeing you in the further sessions today. Again, that link is in the chat here. Please migrate to the next session now.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.